Hello, YouTube. I think this is working. If somebody could sound off in the chat or comments and let me know that you can hear me and see me and all that sort of thing, and that this thing really is working, that would be really helpful. I hope that you are doing well today. I think I can see on here it's telling me I have 3 people who can see this, and so um, yeah. And so if everything is clear and it's coming through okay and you can hear it all right, if you could let me know. Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you. Um, well, good morning, everyone. I do have a couple of things I want to start with before we can just kind of go willy-nilly into questions and answers. I've got a kind of reflection and some things I want to share with you, some things I've learned in the last week or so, and some things that I've been just reflecting on this morning. If you're familiar with something called the Daily Office, which is a kind of like a Bible reading devotional plan, but it's for churches and prayer services and stuff like that, that'll take you through a psalm, an Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading every day. Thank you very much, y'all. Appreciate it. Psalm 31 is the daily psalm today in what's called the Daily Office, and so I wanted to share that with you. Let me see if I can do this correctly, and we'll shrink that down. And we're all learning how to use this technology right now, right? Yeah. So this is well, that's not Psalm 31, is it? That's 1 Corinthians 11. We'll get to that in just a moment. But this is Psalm 31 right here, and let me make sure that that's clear on your screen. Yeah. So listen to this, and I just thought it was really appropriate that this would be the daily psalm for today. A psalm of David. In you, O Lord, in you, O Yahweh, do I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress, and for your name's sake you lead me and guide me. You take me out of the net they have hidden for me, for you are my refuge. This image of a hidden net to me is close to what a lot of us are feeling right now. That you are sanitizing surfaces like crazy. You're washing your hands a lot more carefully. You're really aware now suddenly of kind of if your hand's on a doorknob, or if your hand is on even the steering wheel of the car, keyboard, your phone, lots of stuff that maybe you didn't think so much about before. Feels like there's a kind of hidden net for you. This thing could get you at any time. Into your hand I commit my spirit, which is Jesus is quoting Psalm 31:5 when he's on the cross. For you have redeemed me, O Yahweh, faithful God. I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in Yahweh. I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul. So that's encouraging for you and I this morning to know that God knows the distress of our soul. A particularly good verse to know if you wrestle with anxiety. Although I'm still waiting to meet the person that says they don't struggle with anxiety, but never mind. And you have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. And so you can have enemies in the fleshly sense. We don't talk as much about that. The Psalms talk quite a lot about it. But you also have 3 primary enemies that you fight every day: the world, the flesh, and the devil. And so when the Psalms mention our enemies, those things connect there just as well. You have not delivered me into the hand of the world, the flesh, and the devil. The flesh, all the fears inside of me. The world, I would say, where would you put something like coronavirus? I would say probably the world. I know you're thinking, well, but the flesh, sickness. Yeah, flesh is typically a metaphor for the sinful nature and things like that. I think when we're referring to the world in all of its Genesis 3 brokenness after the fall, disease would be included in that. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, my years with sighing, my strength fails because of my iniquity, my bones waste away, because of all my adversaries, world, flesh, devil. I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors. If you're ill and wearing the mask, then you are a reproach to your neighbors. I know because it was just a couple of days ago. My next door neighbor is a very elderly fellow, and he's got the mask on and just coming outside to get something out of my car and seeing him, and it just kind of with a start, and we are distancing ourselves. Not that I mean, reproach would be a bit strong, but I do wonder at times if this isn't relevant for us right now in these ways. An object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me, at least a good 6 feet flee from me. I have been forgotten like one who is dead, like a broken vessel. For I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side. Terror on every side as they scheme together against me and plot to take my life. So you have terror on every side. You have neighbors he can't trust. And what does he say? I trust in you, O Lord. I trust in you, O Yahweh. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hands of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face shine on your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. O Lord, let me not be put to shame, for I call upon you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go silently to Sheol, to death. Let the lying lips be mute, which speak insolently against the righteous in pride and contempt. Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, and worked for those who take refuge in you in the sight of children, the children of mankind. In the cover of your presence you hide them from the plots of men. You store them in your shelter from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was in a besieged city. I had said in my alarm, I'm cut off from your sight. But you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy when I cried for help, when I cried to you for help. Love Yahweh, all you his saints. He preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. So that was the daily psalm today. I thought it was so helpful, and a lot of lines there that I think are applicable to us. And one more thing on that, and then I'll move into maybe hearing some questions and stuff like that. But I was listening to a podcast this morning, and let me see what will happen if I do that. Okay, that's fine. Listening to a podcast this morning, and they were talking about it was two pastors that were talking about kind of the weird things that we've had to adapt to now, whether it's live stream services or these kinds of things that I'm doing right now. And a question that was put, I forget which one asked it, but a question that one of the two pastors asked, he said, the word church, the word that we use for church, it comes from the Greek word ekklesia in the New Testament, which literally translated means the assembly or the assembled ones. And so then he said, if we're not assembling, if we're doing this virtually and digitally, and he wasn't trash talking, virtual church, but he was saying if we, in the sense that he wasn't saying we shouldn't do it in times like this, but he said if church means assembly and we can't assemble, then is that church? Is that church if we can't assemble? And the conclusion that they came to, and I'm inclined to agree with it, is no. That's not church. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad to do it. Certainly, ministry of the word is taking place, and people receive the word, hear the word, are ministered to by the preaching of the word and the singing of the word and praying of the word. Those are all good things. But it's not church. And it's really important because one day we're going to gather again once this crisis passes. And that'll be the restoration of the assembly and the church. And so right now we're not assembling. Right now the church is on hold, you might say. Gathering together, being church is on hold, if you want to put it that way. So what do we call that? Well, as they continue to talk, there's a word for this. There's a word for when the church can't gather together as the church. Perhaps you know the word. The word is exile. And the observation was right now the church is in exile, a kind of exile. And you think of, I think it's Psalm 137. when we were the Israelites are saying we sat by the waters of Babylon and we sat down and wept, and our captors were telling us, sing us a song of Jerusalem. And how can we sing the song of the Lord in a foreign land? What they were saying is, how can we be God's people? How can we be the church if we're not in the temple together? That was the idea. Now, why does this matter? Because it's worth considering that when Israel was in exile and when they didn't have a temple, it was during that time that a group of Jews got together and decided to formulate what Jewish life would be like without a temple. And do you know what they called themselves? They called themselves the Pharisees. And so it's in this time of exile, when God's people cannot assemble as they're called to do, when some well-meaning but really wonky, terrible, deadly theology takes root, or at least gets going, the people that Jesus would eventually square off with and challenge. The Pharisees started during the time of exile. And I'm not a prophet, but I would predict that out of this time, when we're in this kind of exile, we're going to see some wonky theology start to take root and to bear fruit. And so let's just keep in mind that we're in exile. This thing that we're doing online and the stuff we're having to make concessions for and the way we're having to do online services and stuff like that, that's not the assembly. The assembly is something that one day when this crisis is over, we're going to return to. And the virtual services and all that, that's what we are doing in our time of exile right now. But it's not the same. It's not equivalent. It's not essentially the same as being physically present with one another. And it's not us gathering together. And so I want to give you that caution, that we are right now the church in exile, and a kind of exile, I should say. I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but it is a kind of exile because we can't meet together. So be careful. Be careful at this time, because we're going to be tempted to say, well, because that worked during that time, we can make it work all the time. And again, I'm not saying that once all this is over and past, you can't continue to do live stream services. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think there's a real danger here that in time to come, the conclusion that some will come to is, well, we did live stream service. That's basically the same, right? I'm just going to stay home now because what's the difference? There's a big difference. What we're doing now is a concession. What we're doing now is a temporary kind of plan B. That it's not the plan A that the Lord has given to us. So with that, I'm going to start off. You guys, again, if you want to ask questions in the comment area or make comments or give me something to talk about. Otherwise, I'm kind of going to blab on with whatever pops into my head to talk about, and that can be very, very scary. But I am going to start with something not so scary, and that is an email that was sent to me that I said it was a question, and so I thought, well, I'll use it then for the question and answer time on Monday. And so here's the email. It's from Laura, and Laura's here with us today. Hello, I know you're probably insanely busy. Yeah, don't know about insanely. I mean, maybe it feels, you know what, I'll go ahead and own that. Yeah, insanely busy. But I wanted to let you know that the live stream church sessions, the Q&A, and everything else have been an insane blessing. Well, insane blessings for insanely busy people, right? I have not been able to attend church in a long time. Having this available during a time of potential great anxiety has been a lifesaver. That's an understatement. Amen. Good. As for the question, I was watching the live stream last week, and there was an event 2 to 3 years ago where my best friend, and the name has been redacted, best friend whom I've talked about, let's see, living in, okay, best friend was forced by her aunt. This person was forced by her aunt. We'll call her Aunt Susie. Her Aunt Susie made her take communion. Her Aunt Susie forced her to take communion. This friend of mine is not saved. She was extremely uncomfortable in the situation, but Aunt Susie kept pushing her. My experience with the reverence of the Lord's Supper is new. So the question is, what repercussions are there, if any? She was not told or informed of the rules regarding the Lord's Supper. When I told her about my reservations of what Aunt Susie made her do, she had no idea. So, all right. So basically, the question is that this young lady, who's not a believer, was present at a church service where the Lord's Supper was being served, where people were being communed, and an adult who was with her forced her to go up there and receive the Lord's Supper. And so then the question is one about consequences to that. So with that, and I forgot that I had left Psalm 31 behind me up here, but for that, I'm going to go to 1 Corinthians 11. All right, and let's see, 1 Corinthians 11, beginning in verse 17. Paul starts talking about the Lord's Supper to the Corinthian church. He says, "But in the following instructions I do not commend you, because when you come together," okay, that's important. Coming together, assembling together is when the Lord's Supper is practiced. "It is not for the better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, as an ecclesia, as an assembly, I hear that there are divisions among you. I believe it in part, for there must be factions among you in order that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. When you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper that you eat, for in eating each one goes ahead with his own meal." Okay? Now, I'm just going to mention in passing, this is also why I'm not comfortable with the idea of virtual or online communion. First of all, because you hear that language, when you come together, there's a coming together that has to happen, or that is happening at the very least. And then Paul says, each one goes ahead with his own meal. In other words, you're serving the Lord's Supper to yourself. You're really making this a self-directed thing. And that's why the celebration of the Lord's Supper disconnected from the assembled church is something that I want to avoid, as insofar as it's possible to avoid it. For in eating, each one goes ahead with his own meal. One goes hungry, another gets drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in, or do you despise the church of God, the assembly of God, and humiliate those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I commend you in this? No, I will not. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you." And then we have what we call the words of institution. "The Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, also, he took the cup after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Whoever, therefore,'" now this is where we're getting to Laura's question, "whoever, therefore, eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty concerning the body and blood of the Lord. Let a person examine himself then, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself." So two things we learn in verse 29 there. One, that discerning the body, that is having some kind of fundamental understanding of what's happening in the Lord's Supper, that when Jesus gives these words of institution, "This is my body, this is my blood," he's feeding you with himself. Having, at the very least, a fundamental, rudimentary understanding of what's happening in the supper is important, because you need to discern that the body and the blood of the Lord are here, and that we're sharing them together. That's why we don't feed communion to infants or to children who can't make some kind of profession or understanding of that discernment. So that's the first thing that we learn. Second thing that we learn, if you don't discern the body, you eat and drink judgment on yourself. Rather than eating and drinking forgiveness, which is what Jesus said in the words of institution, like poured out for the forgiveness of sins, you're eating and drinking judgment. And then he says, verse 30, "That is why many of you are weak and ill, and some have died." Right? Okay. That's a verse that we don't read or talk about nearly enough. Baptism is not given that kind of weighty language of judgment. I do think that baptism can still be a mark, a sign, a seal of judgment. But it's not spoken of the way the Lord's Supper is here. But baptism is compared to death, right? This idea that in baptism we enter into the death of Jesus, and so baptism, in a sense, puts you to death, puts you into Jesus's death. But the Lord's Supper, if it's eaten without discerning the body and blood, and again, think of the context: these people that are eating and drinking it irreverently and carelessly, and while hurting their neighbors. But when we are judged by the Lord, we are disciplined, so that we may not be condemned along with the world. In other words, we're repenting of sin. The Lord points out our sin and we repent, all right? So now that's important, verse 32, for Laura's question, because the person in question is not a believer. And so in a sense, that kind of puts her outside of this whole 1 Corinthians 11 text. So then the root of the question is, let me make sure I get the wording right. What kind of repercussions would this incur, if any, at all? I would say, could it be that in this young lady's life, even though somebody else was kind of goading her and making her go up there, could she be in danger of falling under this judgment? Yes, I think, of course. My first question would be, since that happened, has she gotten sick? Is she still breathing? All right, and it looks like the Lord had mercy. And if you want to say, well, but somebody forced her to, yeah, that's true. Somebody really goaded her into going up there, and that matters. But it was still a reality that this was done irreverently. And so, but the easiest way to answer this question is to simply say that situation is not explicitly addressed in the text. It's not what Paul has in mind. But I would want to know I would really want to be kind of made aware of what were the motivations of the woman who kind of pushed her to go up there and to go to take and eat of it when she is not a believer. That's just very odd to me, as to what her motivations in that might be. That may be a misunderstanding of the supper there for her, and actually kind of, and I say this with all sobriety, it seems to me that her Aunt Susie is what I'm calling this lady, that Aunt Susie is in far greater danger of the judgments of 1 Corinthians 11 for not discerning the body and blood of the Lord in the supper and what's happening in the supper, and that this is for believers to receive and trust in. And so I'll put it this way: even if the young lady who ate and drank falls under the judgment of 1 Corinthians 11, even if she does, I would say that her aunt who pushed her up there is in a far greater danger than she is, because we do have a responsibility to one another, and I think especially in older Christians teaching the younger, whether they be younger Christians or unbelievers, to handle those things responsibly and carefully. So Laura, I hope that answers your question. I'm seeing your comment now, and I'm not sure what that was connected to. I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's kind of my answer there. It'll be interesting to see how we're going to be practicing the Lord's Supper at this time. Maybe more on that later. I've got a question here from Colleen, question from Caleb. My teacher in an online lesson said that Jesus is a man on the outside, but God on the inside. How would you answer that? I would say, that's so. Sometimes it can be very helpful to try and restate theological language in more familiar terms, right? So an example of this would be one of my a Christian author that I like to read has started referring to sanctification as holification. It's the way that God makes us holy. So he calls it holification. All right, that's fine and kind of helpful. Something like this, that Jesus is a man on the outside, but God on the inside. I would say that's not particularly helpful. If by that you mean that because Jesus was a man both on the outside and the inside, and he was God on the outside, even though it was veiled, except for the transfiguration, and on the inside. And so when we speak of Jesus, because Jesus had a heart that pumped blood, he had veins with blood in them. That blood was spilled when he was on the cross, and so I mean, part of the good news of the gospel is that Jesus, who was man on the outside and on the inside, spilled what was on the inside for us. I know that's kind of a gruesome way to put it. But I would rather than doing the inside outside distinction, I would say that Jesus is 100% God and 100% man. And that's really hard for us to understand completely. But that Jesus took naps, he had to rest, he had to sleep, he had to eat food, he had to drink, he had to use the bathroom, he had to do all of these things that human beings have to do by virtue of being human beings, which means he was human on the outside and on the inside. But he was also completely God. Now, that, here would be a made-up word, that godness, his godness was veiled. In a sense, it was hidden. We couldn't completely see it. We do see it in moments like miracles, and when he raises Lazarus from the dead, for instance, and we see it on the Mount of Transfiguration, when Jesus becomes this big, bright, shining, like lighthouse beacon times 1,000, and the disciples that are with him fall on their face because they can't look at him. And so in that moment, he unveils, and what I mean by unveils, Caleb, is if you think of, if you were to take maybe a television and put a blanket over it, and the TV's going, but you can't see it at all because of the blanket that's over it. You lift the blanket up, and now you can see what's on the screen. And in a sense, the Jesus's divine nature had the blanket over it. He looked like any other ordinary human being, and that's what I think is meant by this person, the teacher saying God on the outside, but he was, human on the outside, but he was also human on his insides. He was also God on the outside, but the blanket, his flesh, was covering it so that it was hidden. We couldn't see it, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't there. So I hope that's helpful. That's my attempt to answer that on the fly. If there's maybe a follow-up question there, but that's a really good question, Caleb. And I'm not saying that your teacher is saying things that are not true, but I do think probably there's a better way to put that. Next question comes in from, some lady I've met before. Culture has really tried to make relationship with God individual and personal, in the sense that it's all about what's between God and myself instead of a real body and live streams, communion, etc. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm just reading that last part. It's all about what's between God and myself instead of a real body. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So that assembly, being embodied and in a body together, in a congregation assembled together, is made kind of inconsequential. And we've talked about that before at Grace. I call it functional Gnosticism, because the Gnostics made this hard division between soul and body, or between spirit and body, if you like. And we tend to do the same thing today. But one of the ways that we do that is that we say, well, if a religious experience delivers, then it must be good and it must be okay, regardless of whether or not I'm with other people, regardless of whether or not I'm part of a body, whether I'm connected to a local community. All these things, we are radical individualists today, and even that phrase "relationship with God," that's really not language that the Bible uses. Like, you won't find the phrase like relationship with God anywhere. But a better way to probably see that, again, not saying you can't use the word relationship, but it's really, really important that you clarify what kind of relationship. Yeah. Because most relationship talk today, if somebody says they're in a relationship, what do they mean? They mean a romantic relationship. And so if that's the common use of the term, it becomes kind of really important that we clarify that that's not what we mean. We don't mean that we're in a romantic relationship with Jesus. Although if you listen to some of the stuff on the Christian radio, then that's might be the conclusion you come to. But never mind. Let's not talk about that. But I'd prefer to use the language of covenant. That's the language that the Bible uses. That yes, God has put us into a covenant relationship together, which means that He's made promises to us, and that's the thing that we are in relation to. Jesus Christ and His promises, His words to us in the Scriptures. That's really what constitutes us as a people. Jesus' words and promises. Why is that important that we clarify that? Because if we don't, then you could just say, well, I have a relationship with God, by which you mean you have some really nice feelings and warm feelings about God. And maybe you have some religious practices that are part of your life, but you have no connection to the words, promises, or people of Jesus. Well, then you're not in the relationship with God that He has set up, and He has declared this is what it means to be in covenant, in a relationship with me, which is why I think the phrase, it's not a religion, it's a relationship, is really unhelpful. I think to me that's like saying it's not dairy, it's cheese. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. If somebody else has another question, that's we can go there. Otherwise, I wanted to let you guys know that we are going to be trying out something new pretty soon, and it's a drive-in communion service. I'm really kind of excited about it, but we have put on the website, for those of you who are part of Grace and you're in Rapides Parish and you're part of the Grace family. We are looking toward having a series of short Lord's Supper services, communion services next Sunday in the church parking lot. And so you kind of drive in and you're providing the elements yourself, and I'll be providing the words of institution, the celebration of the supper. And so we'll still be partaking it together in a kind of assembly, even though it's a modified assembly. People will be in their cars and they won't be getting out of their cars. It'll be kind of like a drive-in movie situation. I hate using that metaphor, that phrase, but it really is the closest thing to kind of visualize and explain what we're doing. Like I said, we're living in a time of exile, and so it kind of requires that we use measures that we do not ordinarily use. But it's really, really important to me that people still receive the body and blood of Jesus, and thereby receive the good news of His promises in that, and that we still continue to do that together, even if the word together is kind of a modified together, if it's a modified togetherness. I still think it's important that we continue to do that. Let's see. Just making sure. Gonna scroll through here. It's funny when you're on camera. I didn't even realize what I was doing with my hand here, but it's an odd thing. I've been staring at monitors all week for the last few days, compiling, editing, splicing together, learning how to do things I never thought I would get to do. I'm excited that we get to do some of this, but it's a weird time to be in. Although somebody pointed out to me recently, I was talking to a brother here in town and over the phone, and he asked me how I was doing, and I said, well, it's a strange new time. And he said, I don't think so. He said, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Quoting Ecclesiastes there. And his point was, God's people have been through this and through things like this, and we'll go through things like this again. And that was really encouraging, just to be reminded. There's nothing new under the sun. This is different for us, experientially, existentially, certainly it's different for us. Good, for goodness sake. Just some of the kind of existential dread that surrounds all of this is real and palpable, and we need to be careful with that. Panic is a dangerous cocktail, but this is an encouragement that I think we need to keep reminding ourselves of, that this is not a surprise to the Lord, This is not a surprise to the Lord. And it is amazing to me. I mean, I wonder if this whole thing hasn't kind of taught us that when we think about being Christians today, or even converting to Christianity today, what we mean is putting a Jesus spin on and kind of grafting Jesus into the life you've already got, the patterns you already have, the expectations you already have in place. And I know that's not true of everyone. But this is where we're saying, oh man, we move in a different direction. We respond to a different call. We respond differently to crisis. We respond differently to fear. We respond differently to the unexpected. We respond differently to the things that I mean, our enemies, for goodness sake. Psalm 31, we started off with it during this time. That with the psalmist, we're saying, Lord, deliver us, and we're going to continue to live as your people and to trust you no matter what happens. There are stories during the Reformation, particularly in, I was hearing one just the other day, John Calvin's Geneva, in Geneva, France, during the Reformation, that I mean, this is a terrible thing to think about, but I mean, the plague, they were dealing with plague, and so that it came before the pastors, this group of pastors in Geneva, of which Calvin was kind of the head pastor of this group of pastors, John Calvin, that is, if I didn't say that already. But John Calvin was kind of the head pastor of this group of pastors, and they're discussing, like, how do we still do ministry with the reality of the plague? And basically what they did was they drew straws, and the guy that drew the short straw, he was the in-home minister, and he died. And they drew straws again, and that guy died too. And so, I mean, this is, and so when you hear me say things like, we're trusting the Lord to deliver us, I'm not saying that the Lord is going to give us the story that we want. He might deliver us from all evil forever by taking us out of this world. And glory be to his name for doing it. Do you see how I'm saying that Christians are moving to the beat of a different drum? Our marching orders and our expectations in this life are very different from the rest of the world. So there you go. Laura, thank you for a question. I appreciate it. Laura says, what would you suggest for further reading on the covenant relationship? Great question. Hang on just a second. I'm going to grab a couple of books off my shelf to answer that very question. Now, this is live and, of course, highly, highly professional. I mean, as you can see, this is highly professional quality stuff. And so now you get to stare at an empty chair while I go and retrieve a book or two. All right, hang on. I've almost found it. Just another minute. Okay. All right. So, let me see here. One of the best books, or actually three of the best books for this that I would recommend on covenant. The first one is, see if you can see it there. First one's called Covenants, God's Way with His People, and that's by a guy named O. Palmer Robertson. This was really the book, this is an abridged version of a longer book. The longer book is what introduced me to the concept of covenant and really helped me to understand a lot. See, now would be a perfect time for people to join in. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Marjorie. But Robertson's book is really good. It's a little bit, it's an older book, and Palmer Robertson is a seminary professor, so he's, you're going to trip over some terminology. You're going to have to learn. It was a slow read for me. First time I read it, it was a lot to learn. Oh, make the screen big so we can see the book. That's a good call, Marissa. Duh. Hang on. Watch this magic. I will get rid of the 1 Corinthians 11 bit. And, oh, yeah. Sorry about that. This is just my regular face. There's nothing I can do about it. Okay. So, Covenants, God's Way with His People. Maybe if I hold the book in the right place. There we go. By O. Palmer Robertson. So that's the first one. Second one, if that one might be a little technical, another one I would recommend. Actually, I should have recommended this one first. So Laura, start with this first recommendation. And that is Covenants Made Simple, Understanding God's Unfolding Promises to His People by John T. Rhodes. No relation. He does spell it the same way that I do, but I don't know this fellow. So that's a very good one. Covenants Made Simple, Understanding God's Unfolding Promises to His People. Why do I like this one? It's arranged very well. It's easy to understand. It's easy to follow, and it has pictures. Ooh, pictures. Yes, really helpful pictures to help clarify concepts. And so I would recommend that one. Another one is let's see. I'm making sure that this is. This one it's a bit of a different angle on the same idea, which is about covenants, and it's called Far As the Curse Is Found. You'll recognize that from the Christmas hymn Joy to the World, The Covenant Story of Redemption by Michael D. Williams. And so that's another good one as well. But it works through, let's see, Covenant Story of Redemption, and I'll just read out some of the chapters to you. So it starts with the concept of resurrection, takes you through it introduces two concepts, resurrection and Exodus, and then takes you through creation, the fall, the flood, Abraham, patriarch, Sinai, the law, takes you through the whole biblical story and demonstrates how covenant is really the central theme that holds the Bible together. So like to be honest with you, Laura, your question is I think, how can I get a better understanding of covenant relationship as opposed to maybe some of the romantic relationship terminology that's used in Christian piety today, American evangelical piety in particular? That would be one book. I'm trying to think of one more. But do I have it on my shelf? I don't see it. I think it's at home. But another one about the larger concept of relationship with God. So this one has less to do with covenants and more just about some of the common patterns in American evangelicalism that might be worth critiquing. Is a book called Has American Christianity Failed? By a guy named Bryan Wolfmueller, who spells it just like me. Spells Bryan just like me, that is, Bryan. And then Wolfmueller is Wolf, M-U-L-L, Mueller, M-U-L-L-E-R. I don't spell in public. Anyway, Bryan Wolfmueller, and his book, Has American Christianity Failed? And he goes through lots of different... Now, he's a Lutheran pastor, so I would disagree with him on some things concerning baptism and the Lord's Supper. But other than that, a lot of what he lays out is really a remarkable indictment of some problematic theology in American evangelicalism that if we read the Bible carefully, we find that what the scriptures offer us is something far more substantive. So I would also recommend that one. That one's not about covenant specifically, but about kind of concepts and ideas like, religion, not relationship, that might be worth critiquing and replacing with something better. So there you go. Let's see. Let me see. Are there any other questions that have come in? Let me see here. It's 12:43 according to my clock. So, and let me see how many are in on here. And so we get just about 7 of you. That's good. So those are all good places to start for reading about understanding the concept of covenant, and resources that have been very, very helpful to me. Honestly, when it comes to the larger concept of covenant and those 3 books that I showed you earlier, I'm convinced that when you get the concept of covenant, the whole Bible starts to make a lot more sense. And I can attest to that because I've taught covenant and the concept of covenant and the theology of covenants to 9th graders. Okay, when I was a teacher at Grace Christian School, I taught covenants to 9th graders, and I had 9th graders saying, finally the Bible makes sense. Like, yes, even the Old Testament. And when I read it, I feel like I at least have an understanding to make sense of a lot more of it. And so what that concept of covenant does is Genesis to Revelation, it really kind of gives you this arc, this story arc that kind of wraps the whole story of the Bible together. Laura says that she has another question, but we'll remember it as soon as I turn it off. Yeah, and Laura, I'll remember 3 other things that I would have wanted to talk about as soon as I turn this off. So that's kind of the way that goes. Other than that, what are we doing here at Grace? Well, I wanted to let you know that, generally these days I am the only one in the building, which is a bit eerie. I've just kind of walking around in the building and walking into the sanctuary. Dude, if you've never walked into a church sanctuary in the middle of the night, it's super creepy. But that's what the lights are for. So it's generally just me here these days. Every now and then our church secretary, church office manager will come in because she's got to do stuff like payroll and making sure that money's either put in or taken out or sent out to where, we're keeping our commitments and stuff like that. And so she's in here about, I would say at a pace of about 3 or 4 times a month right now. And God bless her. She's continuing to serve us so well and so patiently. And so I thank God for her. But other than that, it's pretty much just me around here these days, which it's I got to admit I miss all the students walking around day to day. I miss having just the daily can pop in and chat with say Robbie, our school principal, or with Karen, our church administrator. I'm missing those things and missing seeing those people around every day. Still, the school bells are still going off, which is kind of weird, but here we are, continuing to carry on in a time of exile, and continuing to trust the Lord in the midst of it. And there are going to be things that are going to be required of us that we don't yet know about. And the good news is that whatever it is that is required of us on any particular day, Jesus knew about it before we got up that morning. So whatever is expected from you today, whatever you've been given to endure today, Jesus knew about it before you got up. And when you pray, give us this day our daily bread, that's what you're asking for. You're saying, Lord, I don't know what's ahead, but you do. And I need enough, what do you want to say? Enough energy, enough patience, enough perseverance, enough godliness, enough love for my neighbor, enough humility in myself to love you and to love my neighbor today, no matter what I'm in. That's how much bread I need, spiritually and physically. And the Lord delights to answer that prayer. That's why he tells us to ask for it. That's why Jesus puts it in the Lord's Prayer, so that we would continue to ask for what we need every day. It's really instructive that the Lord does not say, our Lord Jesus does not say, when you pray, say, give us this day our bread for the week. It doesn't say that. He says, give us this day what we need for this day. And so that's meant to encourage you. And by the way, just as an aside, the Lord's Prayer is very, very encouraging. Just an interesting experiment I would encourage you to do. And you can do this with lots of different Bible texts. It would be weird for some of them, but trying to approach a text fresh, trying to approach it as though you're not as familiar with it as you think. And the Lord's Prayer is a great one to do this with. And what I mean is, pretend you're Jason Bourne, right? If you've seen The Bourne Identity, Jason Bourne wakes up one day, he doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't know where he is. He's just got this box of stuff, and he looks at it and kind of has to discern things about his life, right? So let's put yourself in the Jason Bourne scenario. You wake up, you don't know who you are, you don't know where you are, but next to where you've woken up is a table, and on that table is a copy of the Lord's Prayer. So you start working through it. Right? Okay. Our Father. Okay, I have a father. And not just me, but others. That means I have brothers and sisters who also have this father. Okay, so I'm not alone. I have brothers and sisters, and I have a father. Our Father who art in heaven. Oh, okay, this father lives in heaven. Well, if he's my father, and that's where he lives, that must mean that that's really where my home is. Because if that's where my father lives, then that must be home, or a home that he's making for me, one or the other. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Make your name holy. Okay, so my Father has a name. My Father has a name, and it's my desire that that name be revered, be hallowed. Okay, so the name of my Father is really important to him. And if he's my Father, then it's really important to me. It's really important that it be reverenced. And so you read on. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Let your kingdom come. Well, okay, so my Father who's in heaven is not just a sort of heavenly papa, heavenly dad. He's a king. He's got a kingdom, apparently. Let your kingdom come. Okay, so that kingdom then is on its way, but it's not here yet. Let your kingdom come. So apparently there are other kingdoms. Kingdoms that are opposed to the kingdom that my Father has and that's on its way here. But I want his kingdom to be here, not the other kingdoms. I want to see those go down. Let your kingdom come. Let your will be done. Let your will be done. Right? So my Father wants to accomplish things in this world. And I want him to accomplish those things too. But there are wills and desires and plans that are opposed to what my Father is doing. And so I want to see his kingdom come. I want to see his, to put it metaphorically, I want to see his castles set up. I want to see all the nations conquered under his lordship so that his will is being done. His will is happening in my life and all the lives of my brothers and sisters who pray with me, our Father, on earth as it is in heaven. So my Father that's in heaven plans to make this place where I am just like his place where he is. My Father's in heaven, and I want him to bring that kingdom here. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day. All right, I have needs. Okay? Apparently my Father knows them, and I'm going to ask him that he provide daily bread. Okay? So there is something about living day to day that's important to my Father, and depending on him for his provision every day. I need it, right? Without bread, without food, I die. He knows that. But apparently he just wants me to be concerned and prayerful about today specifically in terms of asking for his provision. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our debts. I have debts. I have wrong that I've done and I owe people as we forgive our debtors. So there's forgiveness that is needed. I need it. My brothers and sisters need it. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So there's something that my brothers and sisters and I have in common. It's that we are apparently debtor. We owe a debt. We are sinners. We have wronged. It has to be only one person here. There's only one other person in view, which is my Father. And so I've got these debts, but I also have debtors, plural. So that means people that owe me, and I have to forgive them. I'd rather not do that, though. That's hard. But then my Father tells me that has to be connected with the same way that I desire forgiveness for my debts. Wow. So my Father desires that I would be the sort of person who, when people legitimately owe me, that I forgive them. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and lead us not into temptation. So he's leading me in all things, and there's going to be temptation. Okay? So I want to ask him to keep me from that. But what about when that doesn't happen? What about if it's my Father's will that I do undergo a time of temptation? Like, for instance, a time of fear or uncertainty or not knowing what's going to happen next. The next bit is deliver us from evil. Oh, okay. So So keep me out of temptation. But if it is given to me to face temptation, then deliver me when I'm tempted. Deliver me when I'm tempted. So apparently there's evil that I'm going to have to face. There's evil that I'm going to be up against. Christians call that the world, the flesh, and the devil. There's evil that I'm going to be up against today. And I need to make sure that while I'm going up against that evil, I remember some things, that I have a father, that I have brothers and sisters, that my father's bringing a kingdom here, that he's making this world more and more like his world, that he's going to give me the daily bread to face the temptations and the evil, that he's going to forgive my debts, and he's apparently going to help me forgive all of my debtors. That's part of the daily bread, by the way. Isn't it interesting that daily bread comes before forgive us as we forgive our debtors? Because I need a lot of daily bread, spiritually speaking, emotionally speaking, mentally speaking, to forgive my debtors. That's part of the daily bread. He's going to give me daily bread to forgive my debtors, to trust him in the midst of temptation. And he's going to deliver me from evil. He means to deliver me. I don't deliver myself. He means to deliver me out of it. And what's the last thing I can say about my Father? That he has all the power. He has all of this kingdom. He has all of the glory for it, and will forever and ever. Amen. So that's a way that you can use the Lord's Prayer, the sort of Jason Bourne model for the Lord's Prayer, which, by the way, I did not invent. The idea, anyway, comes from Bryan the same guy that wrote Has American Christianity Failed? So I want to give credit to him there. But work through that today, perhaps, if you're afraid. And you can work through Bible texts like that, and especially like prayers. We find prayers in the Bible, especially Psalms. You find a psalm, and what is it that you learn about yourself and God when you work through this psalm? So I hope that's an encouragement to you. I'm gonna read to you again that the last part of let me bring this window back up. That last part of Psalm 31 that I read earlier, because I think it's where I want to end today. Love the Lord, love Yahweh, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong, and let your heart receive courage. Let your heart take courage. Let your heart do it. All you who wait for the Lord. And so as we continue to wait in exile, my encouragement to you and my encouragement to me is to keep trusting in the promises of our Jesus, who's promised us what? The forgiveness of all of our sins, the resurrection of the dead, and the life everlasting. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. God bless you.